Could I have all the tellers up to take a picture real quick before we get started? Our three member showcase tellers and our featured tellers, please come up on stage just for a moment. Apparently. Tellers, move to the stage. I'm drawing you here. Okay, we need, is Alton, Andy? He's obviously leaving. Okay. Alton's coming. Okay. Okay.
Oh, you too. It's been great spending time with you this weekend.
Do it again sometime.
Okay, we got, I guess we have everybody.
And except the Alton.
Where's Alton?
Alton Chung. Come to the stage, Alton.
Yes.
That was a mistake.
You guys want to do the two-step? Can you teach us?
How much time we got? This is more of a big kick. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I think that's easy.
Do you want us in one line across like this, or is it better for a couple to come out close? Here it comes. Marilyn, can you do one from mine too?
Okay, if you will mosey back to your seats. Okay. As we know, 5 minutes is always 10 minutes. That's just, it's a storyteller thing. Yes. Oh. Wow. All right. Now we're going to have our featured tellers, but you know, we enjoyed our member showcase so much, and I was so happy to have that before this. But now we're going to give our featured tellers a last opportunity to share some wonderful stories with us. And at this time, we're going to bring up again our cowboy, troubadour, poet, and good-looking guy. Yes. Come on up.
Good morning. Did y'all know that they have a timer in the back of the room so that we know when our time is up? Don't you wish they had those in church? In a western town in the days of old, before the mines closed down for the lack of gold, the folks there seized opportunity and built them a right smart community. They built him a school where the R's was taught, and they built him a church on a corner lot, and they painted her white with a steeple high to greet town folks as they's passing by. They had him a sheriff, a judge, and a mayor, but they needed a preacher to make things square, so they sent back east, as was the general rule, and hired one fresh from divinity school. Now when Sunday come, he was all decked out to preach a sermon, whisper and shout, but when he stepped up to the podium, it was all too obvious that no one come, except one old cowboy in his pew back there, in his Sunday shirt and his greased down hair. He just sat there quiet and stared at the floor with an occasional glance towards the church's doors. Time stood still for the longest while till the preacher coughed and faked a smile. I guess we could try it again next week, but emotion reigned. He could hardly speak. His demeanor was that of a scolded pup, and he turned to leave when old Jake spoke up. Now hold on there, preacher, 'tain't your fault. And them there doors ain't like no vault, 'cause there ain't no locks for to keep folks out, and if you don't preach now, old Satan's won the bout. Now if I was to haul out a whole load of hay, and only one cow showed up, she'd get fed that day. Well, this preaching man for the last few days had found it hard to cope with these Western ways, but he figured as how he had found his call from this profound man with his Western drawl. So he fixed his collar and he stood up straight and began to expound on the pearly gates. And he amazed himself at his own recall of that book he waved, chapter, verse, and all. It was God Almighty's omnipotent power that he lectured on for over an hour. Then the wages of sin, then the hell's brimfire, and he didn't weaken and he didn't tire, and he was jumping and screaming and pounding the floor when, well, he noticed old Jake weren't awake anymore. Well, this made him mad. He stomped to the pew, he shook Jake's shoulder, he said, "I weren't through. You're the one told me about that cow getting fed. Now here you're acting like you're home in bed." Well, you're right there, preacher, about them things I told you, and if I had that load of hay, it would still hold true. That cow would get fed. Why, it's the cowman's code. But I wouldn't feed her the whole darn load. Thank you. This is a song written by a good friend of mine in Lubbock, Texas, named Andy Wilkinson. He writes a lot of original songs based on historical happenings. And out there in West Texas, where I live, there was a grave found out on the prairie that was simply marked by a wooden plank. And the grave had words burned into it, and the words said this: "Sammy done his damnedest. Angels can do no more." We laid young Sammy to his rest, dug a deep hole and we did our best to say the right things as we knocked the dirt from the shovel. So far from God and so near to a life of trouble. No more than a boy when he died like a man. We stood around his grave with our hats in our hands, leaning first on one foot and then on the other, wishing that we knew what to say to write to his mother. But there ain't much to say when a man dies young, before he can do what he should have done. Leastways the cowboys that knowed him swore that Sammy done his damnedest. The angels can do no more. We stood around his grave and nobody spoke until the trail boss coughed and cleared his throat and said, "Do the cook tear a plank off the chuck wagon and leave it here to mark the grave of our young companion." So the wrangler made a fire out of dry prairie coal. The wind fanned the flames till the branding iron glowed, and we burned in the wood the words we should have been saying, down on our knees like a bunch of growed men praying. But there ain't much to say when a man dies young, before he can do what he should have done. Leastways the cowboys that knowed him swore that Sammy done his damnedest. Angels can do no more. And Sammy rode hard and he never complained for 2 long years on the rocking chair range, chasing them strays down the Salt Fork of the Red River. Angels and cowboys' work goes on forever. And as for myself, when it's my turn to die, I hope there's a cowhand or two standing by to pack down the dirt and carry the news to my family and say over me what we should have said over Sammy. But there ain't much to say when a man dies young, before he can do what he should have done. Leastways the cowboys that knowed him swore that Sammy done his damnedest. Angels can do no more. Sammy done his damnedest. Angels can do no more. My friend Andy Wilkinson, who wrote that song, is a descendant of Charlie Goodnight, the great cowman from Texas, who blazed the Goodnight Loving Trail. He was quite a character, and I was visiting with, I think, Jessica. We were talking about Lonesome Dove, and that novel and that film was based on the life of Charlie Goodnight and Oliver Loving, loosely. Charlie Goodnight died when he was 93 years old. I believe it was December 11th, 1929. The evening before he died, he ate a meal of buffalo steak and hot, scalding hot black coffee, went to bed. And as his biographer, J. Evetts Haley, said, he died that morning just at saddling up time. And my friend Andy wrote this piece. I never looked forward to the end of the day, or to evenings drab and melancholy gray, or to featureless colors of purple to black, or to work finished up or simply put back as the business of living slowly unwinds. I was always awaiting for saddling up time. I slept of necessity, not pleasure, and not for the comforts of night when the bosom of God cradled mortality and immortal dark, nor for the shroud of cool starlight whose spark like the lamp of the firefly silently chimed. I took my pleasure in saddling up time. And I worried the hectic commotion of morn, the commerce of mercantile and courthouse lawn, the meetings and greetings on sidewalk and street were horseback opinions and auger and meat, and I argued their rhythms and swore at their rhymes, but was playful as a pup come saddling up time. For 'twas then, before ever light angled to fill the round corners, we'd clamor like wolves at the kill. With horse talk, our yap, with our nip and our bite, latigo leather snapping cinches down tight in the summer's wet dew or the winter's sharp rime, as we readied our horses at saddling up time. When the morning night air was marble, we breathed heavy and deep and smooth as the breeze that skitters across the new snow-covered plains. One hand on the horn and the other the reins, we stepped aboard stirrups, young bucks in our prime, salty as the pecos at saddling up time. Though I've lived for this moment most all of my life, beginnings, not endings, put the edge on my knife. I curse too damn much, and I've never prayed well. And it may be God figures to send me to hell riding drag for the devil to pay for my crimes. But I'm damned if I'll go for saddling up time. Thank you so much. Y'all have been such a wonderful crowd. When my set's over here in just a few minutes, I'm gonna grab my bags and hop in a car with Walt and head to the airport and fly home. And so I can't stay for the rest of the show. And I just want to say thank you to each of you that are here. Thank you to Joel and the board and all of the folks with the Florida Storytelling Association and my fellow tellers. It's been a real pleasure spending time with you, and I hope our paths cross again. And I would just like to end with this song and send this out to all of you and for the good work you're doing to tell stories. So it's written by one of our favorite folk singers out west, a guy named Utah Phillips. As my friend Ramblin' Jack Elliott would say, not me, Meetaw Phillips, you, Utah Phillips. Let me sing to you all the old songs I know, wild windy places locked in timeless snow, and the wide crimson deserts where the muddy rivers flow. Well, it's sad, but the telling takes me home. Come along with me to some places I have been. People still look back and they still remember when, and the quicksilver legends like sunlight turn and blend. Well, it's sad, but the telling takes me home. We'll walk along some wagon road, down the iron rail, past the rusty Cadillacs that mark the Boomtown Trail, where dreamers never win, doers never fail. Well, it's sad, but the telling takes me home. I'll sing of my amigos who come from down below, whisper in their loving tongue the songs of Mexico. They work their stolen Eden, lost so long ago. Well, it's sad, but the telling takes me home. I'll tell you all some lies just made up for fun, and the loudest, meanest brag can beat the fastest gun. I'll show some unmarked graves that tell how the West was won. Well, it's sad, but the telling takes me home. I'll sing of an emptiness the East has never known, where coyotes don't pay taxes and a man can live alone. And you have to walk forever just to find a telephone. Well, it's sad, but the telling takes me home. Let me sing for you all the old songs I know, wild windy places locked in timeless snows, and the wide crimson deserts where the muddy rivers flow. Well, it's sad, but the telling takes me home. Thank you, folks. Thank you all for having me.
After another wonderful performance from Andy Hedges, there's only one thing I have to say, and you can join in if you want to. Happy trails to you till we meet again. Happy trails to you. I don't remember the rest. Have a good trip. Yes. Yeah, it's funny what you remember from the cowboy shows of your youth. At this time, we would like to welcome another wonderful teller that you've enjoyed this weekend already, Jessica Robinson.
So, as a kid, I loved magic and fantasy. I read every fantasy story ever written, and I also read the nonfiction Time Life series, you know, proving that dragons and unicorns and wizards and fairies are real. You know, I collected the squished fairy photos, and here's the thing. When I grew up, all I wanted to be was magic. Like, not a magician, magical, like a witch, you know, like a good witch, like a Wiccan or something, you know, or if I couldn't be magic, then I wanted to explore magical land, like fairyland, and document the creatures I found there, or maybe just catch one fairy. That's all I wanted out of life. And so you can imagine, as I got older, it was hard for me to accept that magic isn't real. I don't know that I actually ever accepted that, but I had to at some point choose a career, and so I figured if I couldn't be magic, I could make movie magic, which is how I ended up going into film production, and now I'm a videographer. I started my video production company about 20 years ago, and all right, so corporate video production is not exactly like movie magic, you know? And I work in the DC metro area, so all of my clients have, they're all associations and nonprofits, and they all have names like the ACA, or the ADA, or the ACDC. And they all want videos for their website to increase sponsorship or improve membership, or improve sponsorship and increase membership. Yeah, I'm not going to say it gets boring, but it does get a little repetitive. So you can imagine how excited I was when a few years ago, I got an email from a different sounding organization. Okay, well, it didn't, the email didn't sound that different. It was just signed the AODA. But when I looked it up, because, you know, when you're hearing from a prospective client, you do your research. When I looked them up, you know what AODA stands for? Ancient Order of Druids in America. I was gonna be working with druids. And if you guys don't know, maybe you didn't read all the same books, but druids are magic. They do like earth magic. They worship the Tuatha Danann, who are like the gods of the fairies. And they wanted me. I was so excited. But you know, I calmed myself down. I wrote out a list of qualifying questions before I called them back because, you know, if you're trying to land a prospective client or capture a fairy, it doesn't help to be overeager. And then I called the number on the email, and they transferred me to the executive director, who I swear was named Seamus. And he had this little Irish lilt, and I asked him the questions, and his answers were very standard. Like he wasn't just like Shazam, you know. It was, and it turns out that they wanted a video for their website to increase sponsorship and improve membership, and. Okay, so I'd done that before. I know how to do that. So I put together a proposal, I sent it off, and a few days later I heard back and I landed the Druids. Now, our shoot was gonna be 2 days. The first day we were doing interviews, and the next day we were gonna do B-roll. And on the first day, I was looking forward to meeting these people face to face because I'd only talked to them on the phone. And I went to their office in DC, which was this sort of gray, drab office building, which was a weird place for druids to have their headquarters, but whatever. And when I was going to meet them, I was, all right, don't tell anyone, but I was kind of picturing the cast of Lord of the Rings. Like I was thinking Seamus would look like Gandalf, you know, with the robes and the... So when I got there, I was a little disappointed because there was like 5 people who worked in the office in Seamus, and they were all wearing like your standard DC issue blue power suit, you know, no robes among them. But Seamus did kind of look like Legolas, you know, the hot elf from the movies. So I was okay with that. And then I interviewed everyone, and then I interviewed Seamus at the end, and his answers were all very professional. He was well-spoken, he was intelligent, he talked about membership benefits and nature conservancy and sponsorship dollars and, you know, nothing about magic. But fine, it was good stuff. I was getting some good quality video. And I was excited to go and shoot B-roll the next day. We were going out to the orchard that they owned in Western Virginia. Of course, druids own an orchard. And I got out there that morning, and it was a beautiful orchard. There's mountains and blue sky and clouds in the background, and I got great footage of you know, Seamus like pointing up at the sun and then running his fingers through the earth and picking an apple. It was great. And then they performed a ritual for me, a druidic ceremony. But Seamus explained, since I wasn't a druid or an apprentice, and since it was going out to the public, they weren't going to perform an actual holy ritual. They were just staging it, which was a little disappointed, but you know, it was fine. So they had this bonfire, and the 12 of them circled the bonfire, and they did stuff that looked kind of like Tai Chi in a circle, and it was beautiful. It was great. And I got back to my office, and I edited all the footage together, and I made this fantastic video, and I sent it off to Seamus, and he approved it, and it went on their website, and everyone was happy. Except for me, because spending time this close again to magic made me really remember how much I had wanted that in my life. And again, I thought, well, maybe I can't be a witch, but maybe I could be a druid. So I called Seamus up and I said, listen, I'm really thinking about becoming an apprentice. Like, I'm thinking about signing up for this. And he said, all right, well, here's the thing. We have our Imbolc ceremony this coming weekend. For those of you who don't know, Imbolc was yesterday. We have our in-bulk ceremony this weekend that celebrates the coming of new life, the coming of the spring. Why don't you come and watch and see what you think? And you can't participate. You got to stay back. Don't interrupt the ceremony. But if you like it, we'll discuss next steps. And inside, I was like, oh yeah, sure. That sounds. I can. So Druids have their ceremonies, their rituals during their holy hours, which for Druids are the hours around dawn and the hours around dusk, which is funny because videographers call those hours magic hour because the light is magical. So this ritual was happening early in the morning, pre-dawn, and I drove out to the orchard, and when I arrived, they already had the bonfire going. It was still dark. The sun was getting ready to start rising, and the Druids were already there. They were already in a circle around the bonfire. And I parked far back, and I just stood far away, near my car, and I started watching, and they, this time, unlike when they staged it, they began chanting. And it was Gaelic or Celtic, I don't know, it was all Greek to me, but it was beautiful. It was like Enya. And they began chanting, and as they started chanting, they began circling the fire, and they were doing arm movements, raising their arms up and lowering them down, spinning and rotating as they circled the fire. And as the sun started to rise and the sky got lighter, it was just so beautiful. And I'm a videographer. I always have a camera with me, and I thought, this is the footage that they're gonna want on their website. Like this is the stuff that's gonna hook people. So I got my camera out and I just started recording it because it was so gorgeous. And as they chanted, the chanting grew faster and faster, and the spinning and the arm movements and the rotating grew faster and faster, and I felt the energy building, and it was just flowing through me. It was powerful. And then right at the very end, they all turned away, facing outward from the fire, and they threw their arms up in the sky, and they uttered these words of power, and just then their fingertips began to glow as the sun broke over the trees. And I was glowing. I was filled up with this energy. And then the ceremony was over, and Seamus looked over at me, and I was glowing, and he glared at me. And then he walked towards me, stopped, really, and he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, I'm sorry, you invited me here. And he said, "No, I mean, why do you have that?" And I had completely forgotten. I had had my camera out the whole time. And I said, oh, it was just so beautiful. I wanted you to have it. And he said, "Well, I don't need it, and you can't use it. Delete it." And I said, of course. And he said, "I think you should leave now." And I did. And I was crushed because I had come so close once again to something so beautiful. And I went back to my office, and I took the SD card out of my camera and I put it on the shelf. I figured I'd deal with it later. And then I tried to go back to business as usual, to the real world again. But I'd felt like this thing that had woken up in me again had once again been crushed. And as I tried to get back to business as usual, the world shut down. March 2020, my business shut down. I found myself with a lot of free time. So I started, cleaning my office and organizing my files. And then eventually I got around to going through all that footage that I'd never sorted to do anything with, and putting it in files and deleting it and all that stuff. And I came across the SD card with the in-bulk footage on it. And you can't use footage that someone's told you not to, unless you want to get sued. which I didn't. But I thought, let me look at it again. I want to see if it is as beautiful as I remember. I started watching it, and again, I felt the energy. I felt the power. I was entranced, even through my monitor. It was everything. And then I thought I saw something right at the end, right when they threw their arms up and uttered those words of power. I swear there was something there. So I rewound and I watched it again, and yes, there was. So I rewound it again, and then I stepped the footage forward, frame by frame. And there it was. For one frame out of 30, behind Seamus, just at the end of the ceremony, there was a shimmering outline of wings.
Wow. Well, as a kid, we had our own fire ceremonies. You know, we'd go to the river and we would build a fire, and it had to be big enough that you could see it from space. That was the first rule. And we would melt glass, and we would throw strange things in and see what would happen. And we would make things called upjohns, where we would take a piece of paper and tie the four corners together and put it over the fire, and it would go all the way up in the air. But the favorite thing was something we referred to as the puke pipe. You ever heard of a puke pipe? We would take a pipe filled with water and stick it in the 1,000 degrees of the fire and wait until all the water spewed out the other end. And that's what we did for fun. And even as an adult, when we have a fire, I am the fire master, the owner of the pokey stick. So fires are big in our family. And now let us welcome Alton Chung for another wonderful session of stories. Thank you.
Well, they've asked me to do an extra story, so I got a couple stories for you, and they don't know that I got a second story, so it's going to be fun. Not once, not twice, but thrice upon a time, there was a newlywed couple who were having troubles making ends meet. And the husband opened the door one morning, and he stepped out, and there on his doorstep was a dead body. And he knew he was in trouble. The magistrate of the town was an evil man, and he knew that he was going to get blamed for this. So he went to his wife and said, I am going to have to go far away. I'm going to find a job. I'm going to work hard. And when it's safe for me to come back, I will give you the life of comfort that you deserve. I don't know how long I'm going to be, but I ask you one thing. Wait for me. Be true to me, and I'll be true to you. Well, his wife loved him, and she agreed. So he traveled long and far until he found a job in another faraway town with a man who was very wealthy. And his new master made him a deal. Said, my boy, if you work for me for 20 years, I will give you all that you need for your living expenses. And at the end of that time, I will give you all the wages that you earned in those 20 years in one lump sum. The young man agreed. Now, not only did he have to go, see, the people came, not only this man was rich, but he's also very wise. And people would come from near and far and pay dear for his advice. Now, not only would this young man cook and clean, he also would usher in the clients to see his master, take care of his master's needs, and he would take care of all the money. He was very good at his job. And 20 years, went cruising on by. And toward the end of that time, he had heard that that evil magistrate had passed away, and now there was a young, much more reasonable man in charge of town. What soon came to the time where his time was up and he was ready to go home. And his master, true to his word, gave him 300 gold pieces, a fortune. Well, as the young man prepared to leave, his master looked at him and says, "Aren't you going to ask me for my advice? Don't you know, for the last 20 years, you've helped people come into my house and ask for my advice?" And the servant didn't want to offend his master, so said, "Yes, master, please give me your advice." "Oh, excellent, excellent. No. For you, my dear friend, I have 3 pieces of advice for my normal fee." The servant blanched. His master's normal fee was 100 gold pieces. He was trapped. "All right, master, give me your first piece of it. Give me your advice." Very well, very well. Wonderful. Now, my fee, please. 100 gold pieces for this exquisite pearl of wisdom. Thank you very much. Now, my dear friend, my first and foremost piece of advice for you is this. Do not leave the old road home for a new one. Go back the same way that you came. What? Do not leave the old road home for a new one? I paid 100 gold pieces for this drivel? Yes, you did, my boy, but because you paid for it, now you will remember it. What is your second piece of advice, master? Ah, yes. Well, first my fee, 100 gold pieces. Thank you very much. Now, my second piece of advice for you is this. Do not meddle in other people's affairs. Let people live their lives on their own. Don't meddle in other people's affairs? I could have gone down the street to the soothsayer and got that for free. Yes, you could have, but now, because you paid for it, you will remember it. What is your third piece of advice, master? Aha, yes. First my fee, 100 gold pieces. Thank you very much. Now, my final piece for you, my piece of advice for you, my long-suffering servant, is this. Save your anger for the next day. Save my anger for the next day? And so the servant prepared to leave. Oh, no, wait, my good man. I cannot let you leave empty-handed. Here. I have give you 2 loaves of bread to sustain you on your journey home, and for you I have a cake. Have this cake with your dear wife when you feel that you are truly happy. Well, that young servant, he didn't even bother. He picked up that heavy box with the cake in it, put it in his pack, put the 2 loaves of bread, he didn't even look at them, put on his pack, and he called upon his 20 years of service for discipline to thank his master. And he left. 20 years. 20 years! And all I have to show for it is 2 loaves of bread and a cake! Well, he went down the road, and soon he encountered some travelers like himself. Oh, but they were good conversations. There were songs, there were stories, there was music, and he shared his first loaf of bread with them, and his heart was lightened. And they came then to a fork in the road. Now, the old road went around the hills and eventually ended up at this town. There was, however, a shortcut cutting over the hills. It was a much shorter way, and all his new companions wanted to go that other way because they said that up on top there was a spring that said to have the sweetest water there was and a magnificent view of the area around, and they asked their new companion, the servant, to come with them. And he was about to say yes when in his ear he heard the voice of his master, "Do not leave the old road for a new one." Fie. He paid 100 gold pieces for the advice, he might as well take it. So I told his new companions to save him a seat at the tavern because they were sure to be at the town before him, and he continued to take the old way. It was dark by the time he got to the tavern, and the tavern was abuzz with excitement. For you see, apparently some travelers had been robbed and murdered on the high road near the spring. Murdered? Murdered? Oh, God bless upon their soul, and God bless my master for his good advice. Oh, 100 gold pieces for that piece of advice was well worth it. The next day, he headed off his way, and he walked, and he walked, and he walked, and soon in the afternoon he came to a dark woods. And he entered that dark wood, and he walked, and he walked, and it was getting, the dark wood seemed to go on forever, and the sun was going down. And in that gathering gloom, he tried not to trip on the trail, and he kept walking and walking, and soon the sun was gone, it was dark, and way out in the distance, he saw a dim light, like the light of a firefly, and he made toward that dim light. It turned out to be the light spilling out through the window of a cabin in the woods. But there was something disquieting about this cabin in the woods. He felt anxious, but he had no choice. There was nowhere else to do, nothing else to do. So he went up to the cabin and he knocked on the door. The door was opened by this enormous man with a long beard, and his hair was wild, and he glowered down at the servant. And then he looked at him and he stepped aside, grunted, and pointed to a chair at the table. Well, the servant sat himself down, and that gruff old man, he went over to this big pot that was bubbling over the fire. He got a bowl, he filled it up with stew, and gave it to the servant. He got another bowl, filled it for himself, and he sat down and without a word began eating. Well, the servant took out his second loaf of bread, broke it in half, and gave half of it to his new host, who just grunted his thanks and continued to eat. The stew was tasty. I mean, the meat tasted a little like pork, but he wasn't quite sure. And they ate and they ate. And then he got down to the bottom of his bowl. And he looked down, and it was a strange piece of meat. And he looked at it and he said, it was a human finger. And he looked at his host. His host was staring at him intently. And he looked at his host's hand. And, he had all 10 of his fingers. And he looked around the room, and the first time he finally saw on a shelf there was a skull. And that skull was grinning back at him. And the servant looked back at his host, and his host was staring at him intently. The young servant took a piece of bread and covered up the offending digit and pushed his bowl away. He nearly jumped out of his skin when beneath the floor there came a rapping sound. The old man, the man with the grizzly beard and the wild hair, stood up, and he went to the corner of the room. He unlocked a trap door, and from beneath the floor there came a woman. She was once very beautiful, but now her eye sockets were empty. And the man went and picked up that skull. He lifted up the top. You can see that the top of the skull had been fashioned into a bowl. And he went over to that pot. He ladled some stew in it, stuck a spoon in it, and gave it to this blind woman. And she ate. And when she was done, he grunted, and she half stumbled, half fell back into her subterranean prison. He slammed and locked the trap door, and he turned to that servant and said, well, what do you think of that? Well, I think the servant was about to give him the tongue lashing that he deserved when suddenly in his ear he heard his master's voice, do not meddle in other people's affairs. I think that you're doing what you believe is best. A very good answer. You may be one of the first in a long time who has survived my hospitality. Yes, that is my wife. She took a lover behind my back, and I caught them. And I took her eyes, and now she eats her supper from his skull. I do not forgive. What do you think of that? Well, I think not only do you have a very good reason, but you are probably doing the best that you know how. Ah, sensible answer. Those who disagree with me end up in the pot. But you have nothing to fear. There's a cot in the corner there. Pleasant dreams. And he stormed off and went to his room and slammed the door. Well, the servant lay there in the cot all night long, repeating his master's words of wisdom. Do not meddle in other people's affairs. Do not meddle in other people's affairs. And when dawn's gray fingers crept through the window, that servant quietly gathered up his things, slipped out the door, and was down the road before he could say, lady fingers. Well, he walked, and pretty soon he began hearing familiar sights and sounds of the place that he had left 20 years before. Oh, his heart was gladdened, and he got to his heading to the town, but he left the woods just as it was getting dark, and by the time he got to his own home, it was fully dark. but there was light coming out the window. So he went up to the window and he peered in. And there he saw his wife. She was older, but still beautiful. But there was something going on. There were all this light. There were all these people. It was some kind of celebration going on. And then he saw her stand and walk over to a much younger man who stood to rise to greet her. And they embraced. And everyone in the room cheered when they kissed, and she began to dance with him. And that servant felt all this anger and rage. For 20 years I have been faithful to her, and now she's taking a younger lover. Oh, and he pulled out his dagger, and the razor-sharp edge glinted in the moonlight. And he said, I'm going to kill them all. And then he heard in his ear his master's words, save your anger for the next day. Fine. All he could do to put his dagger back into its sheath. Fine. I'm going to kill them tomorrow at dawn. And he went off into the woods and spent a very uncomfortable night. He intended to get up at dawn, but because he didn't sleep the night before, it wasn't until noon when he woke up. Well, he got up and he headed toward town with murder in his heart. And who did he happen to meet but an old neighbor? Oh, after all these years, your family be so glad to see you. Do you know that your son, he just been ordained as a priest, and your wife, she was so proud, she was so happy, she danced with him all night long. Son? I have a son? Oh. And he grabbed that neighbor's hand and he shook it and he shook it and he thanked him profusely and he ran into town. He ran into town and he got to his door and he pounded on the door frantically, and his door was answered by his wife. And there was a confused bit of silence as they stared at one another. And then she threw her arms around him, and with great joy and words of welcome and happiness, soon everyone was coming in. She babbled that soon after he left, she found that she was with child, and the servant was now introduced to his son. And there was many questions, and a new celebration began. And he said, no, wait. My master gave me a cake. And he said that I should share with you, my dear, when I was truly the happiest. And now I am truly happy. And he pulled out that cake and he left it on the table. And he pulled out his dagger with a flourish. And then he cut into the cake. And to the surprise of everyone, gold coins began rolling across the table. And when they were counted, they numbered exactly 300 gold pieces and not a penny less. Thank you. And now they asked me to go and throw in an extra story. So this is a little special thing, and they don't know this is coming, but here we go. This story is based upon a book called Pacific Warriors by Dorinda Nicholson, and it's with her permission I can tell you the story. The old man stepped down into the launch for the journey across Pearl Harbor to the Arizona Memorial. With him he had 2 roses, one red, one white, and a silver bugle tucked under his arm. That launch made it across the harbor to the Arizona Memorial itself, and the old man stepped off onto the dock and then proceeded up the ramp. The memorial is like a big white bridge that spans over the sunken battleship. And he made his way to the far end where there's a marble wall, and on that wall are etched the names of 1,177 soldiers and Marines, most of whom lay entombed in the ship below. That old man, he put down those 2 roses in front of that wall, picked up that silver bugle, and played taps. Richard Fisk was the 19-year-old Marine Corps bugler aboard the USS West Virginia, a battleship tied up in Battleship Row in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii on December 7th, 1941. Just before 8 o'clock in the morning, he was on the aft deck, about ready to play Call to Colors, when he noticed a glint in the sky. It was common for planes to practice maneuvers, but he was wondering why this plane wasn't pulling up and away. As the plane got closer, he noticed that slung beneath the belly of the plane was a torpedo. And he watched in horror as he saw that torpedo fall away from the plane, splash gracefully into the water, and run hot and true toward his battleship. The plane flew overhead, and he could see the face of that pilot and the red rising sun of the Empire of Japan on its wings and fuselage. After that torpedo detonated, he ran along the port side of the battleship, the left side of the battleship, up to the battle bridge, which was his battle station. As he went along, he saw many more white wakes of torpedoes heading toward his battleship. The USS West Virginia was hit by a total of 7 torpedoes. When he got up on the bridge, Captain Benningen came running up on the bridge, took one look around, and said, "Oh my God, we're at war." And then there was a tremendous explosion from the USS Tennessee, which was tied up next to the USS West Virginia. It threw shrapnel everywhere. And after the explosion, Captain Benningen lay on the deck, cut almost in half, still alive and still giving orders. Richard Fisk and Doris Miller, who would later become the first black man to receive the Naval Cross for Valor, tried to make the captain as comfortable as possible. And then the USS Arizona exploded. The heat and concussion blew Fisk back into the pilot's room. He watched as his captain was taken away in a stretcher, mortally wounded, still giving orders. He helped free some of his shipmates, helped put out some fires, and then eventually obeyed his captain's final order, which was to abandon ship. And he and his surviving shipmates leapt over the side, swam under the burning oil, and made it to Ford Island in the middle of Pearl Harbor. The next day, Richard Fisk went to the funeral of Captain Benningen and played taps. Captain Benningen would be later awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor posthumously. But this was just the beginning of Richard Fisk's ordeal. You see, every time he closed his eyes to go to sleep, that face of that Japanese pilot, grim, focused, determined, would show up in his dreams and would haunt his nightmares for years to come. His hatred for that one Japanese pilot would turn into a hatred of all Japanese and all things Japanese. Richard Fisk would later on survive the Battle of Iwo Jima, but still, he could not sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, his nightmares got worse and worse and worse, until years after the war, he finally had to have some operations for stomach ulcers. And his doctor sat him down and said, "What is eating you? There's nothing wrong. The war is over. Your job is not stressful. What is eating you?" And for the first time in his life, Richard Fisk told another human being of what he had experienced on that day so long ago. He wept as he told them about his nightmares and that recurring face of that Japanese pilot. And later, Richard would say that his heart grew a couple sizes that day. And telling another human being about his experience changed his life. He no longer hated Japanese. His hatred of things Japanese just vanished. He didn't want to hate anymore, but he also knew that to continue his healing, he'd have to continue to tell his story. Richard Fisk retired from the military in Hawaii, and armed with his scrapbook of photos, he became a National Park Service volunteer at the Arizona Memorial, where he would sit and tell his story to whoever came to the memorial. One day, some Japanese pilots came, and Richard said, Wouldn't it be great? Wouldn't it be great? Some of you veterans get together with some U.S. veterans? A Japanese reporter was there, and a story was published in a Japanese newspaper. In Tokyo, an old man read that account, and he felt his heart lightened. He knew time was running out. Zensei Abe was a lieutenant in charge of a squadron of 9 dive bombers stationed aboard the Akage, one of the 6 Japanese carriers used in the attack on Pearl Harbor. He was in the second wave. He led his squadron across Kaneohe Bay, made that right-hand turnaround, diamond it, and went straight in to his target, the U.S. Naval Fleet in Pearl Harbor. Zenzi Abe, he didn't hate the Americans. Didn't hate the American people. I mean, even after he had spent a year in a Marine POW camp on Guam. In 1991, Zenzi Abe and some other Japanese veterans made the trek to the 50th Annual Symposium at Pearl Harbor. Richard Fisk said that when he saw them, they didn't even shake hands. They just hugged. He saw them as human beings, fellow soldiers. He said later that it was the greatest thing to see these veterans from World War II getting together. It showed that yesterday's enemies are today's friends. And after the symposium, both Richard Fisk and Zenzi Abe, they realized that they wanted to heal old wounds and dissolve old hatreds. And so Zenzi Abe went to Richard Fisk and said, Richard-san, would you give me $300? Of course. Here's my $300. Would you do me a favor? Would you, once a month, go to the Arizona Memorial, buy 2 roses, one for you, one for me, go there and play taps? I know it is a small thing, but it is my way of saying, I'm sorry. Well, Richard agreed. He said he too wanted to honor those who had died on that day. Richard Fisk's obligation to Zenzi Abe began in May of 1992. And Richard Fisk would later become a goodwill ambassador. He was considered that at the Arizona Memorial. And he always told his story, and he always emphasized that the war was a long time ago, and now good relationships existed between Japan and the United States. And in 1996, he was awarded the Order of the Rising Sun with silver rays from the Japanese Emperor for promoting American-Japanese friendship. Richard Fisk, Zenzi Abe continued to send Richard Fisk money. In fact, he even invited Richard to come to Japan. And Richard went to Hiroshima, where he played taps. Richard would continue to fulfill his obligation the last Sunday of every month for 12 years. Richard Fisk passed away in 2004. And he is buried in the columbarium in Punch Bowl, the National Cemetery of the Pacific, right across the way from where my mom is buried. And every time I go see Mom, I pay my respects to Richard Fisk, the man who dedicated his life to the proposition that fear does not have to lead to hatred, and that it can lead to friendship. Change is possible if we only try.
What a wonderful story. Forgiveness is something we do not for others, but for ourselves, so that our own hearts are not filled with bitterness. And so, what a wonderful thing it is when enemies can become friends, even. Another step beyond forgiveness. Alton, that was a beautiful story. Mitchell Areer had to leave unexpectedly, unfortunately. So we're going to conclude our program with one of our favorite storytellers here, and she's going to have some more wonderful personal stories. Robin, would you please join us? And before she starts, one thing. We're going to need some help afterwards. All the black chairs we need to stack up. There's some pallets under here that we're going to pull out. We're going to stack those chairs on the pallets so that people can come get them. So if there's anybody who feels willing and capable to help us with that, boy, we'd really appreciate that. So, okay. Robin Schulte.
What an amazing weekend. It's been my absolute privilege to be here. When I was a kid, my mom spent a week making an audio recording on what was at the time one of those fancy new cassette recorders. It was about as big as a book, and it had the weight of a brick. There was a speaker on half of it, and then there was a little flip door. You all remember these, right? And you would slip a cassette into that little door and close it, and then there was a shiny row of little black rectangular buttons that you would push to play and rewind and fast forward. Ours had a little plastic plug-in microphone with a silver mesh head. And on this recording, my mother talks for almost a full hour about her daily life. She made this recording to send to her older brother, my Uncle John. And she describes the brand new Scotty dog that we had just gotten and named Mr. Bojangles. She tells about the fact that the chicken pox had just run through the house and 3 of her 4 children had come down with them. She details a bungled night out that she had tried to share with my dad. She was learning how to play the auto harp, and she even plays a song and sings along. It's a slice of frozen life from 51 years ago. If I close my eyes, when I hear her voice, I can picture her in the house we lived in Appleton, Wisconsin. My mother was a tiny little thing, 5'2" and 100% hippie. She wore long maxi dresses and lace-up sandals. She read Emerson and Thoreau, and she listened to Woody Guthrie and Bob Dylan. And I remember this project as it was happening. Mom walking around with that little microphone, carrying the cassette recorder. She would narrate what was happening, and then she'd stop and rewind it, listen back, and erase the parts she didn't like. And when she got tired of the 3 of us, the baby was too small, but 3 of her children crawling all over her and begging for a turn, she handed each of us the microphone. And we got to say a few words. So we, in turn, each said something, and then we begged her to play it back so we could hear the sound, the miracle of the sound of our own voices. If I were to play it for you now, you would hear my older sister, Andrea, say, "Is it on? Mom, can I hold it? I'm Andrea, and I'm 8 years old." "What? Yes, I am. I'm 8. You don't know." I'm pretty sure it's me in the background challenging her age. And then I come on and I say, in this weird Wisconsinian accent, "Hi, I'm Robin. I'm 6. And I wear glasses." My little brother, Christopher, he comes on and he says, "I'm Huey Christopher Simpson, and I'm 4 years old." "Well, I'm 3. I'll be 4 next week." "Oh, I mean next month." "I said next week, but I meant next month. I'll be 4 next month." The baby, my brother Jonathan, is too small, too young to speak. And so instead, my mom just holds him on her lap, and she describes him, saying, "Oh, this Jonathan. Well, he's not much to look at. He's got these ears that stick out on the sides of his head. He's got one big one and one little one. Sort of the way our sister Ruthie did when she was little, remember? I find it remarkable that after all the moves and shuffling of my childhood, this cassette tape remains. I think of it as a family archaeological find. It's my Grecian urn. In his poem, Ode on a Grecian Urn, John Keats describes images that are painted on an imaginary urn. There are 3 scenes, and in the first one, there's a young man playing music on a flute as he leans against a tree underneath the bough of the shade of one of the boughs of that tree. And in the next scene, there are 2 young lovers engaged in a chase. The young man behind, reaching out for his love, big grin on his face. And in the third scene, there is a group of townspeople on their way to the altar to make a sacrifice. They are leading with them a small baby calf. And Keats is saddened that we will never hear the music from the piper's pipe. And that young lover will never get to touch the object of his affection. And then he imagines that off of the urn, somewhere there is a village empty of all of its people who are gone to the altar. And it waits in perpetual stillness for their return. It makes him sad for a minute, but then he says, no, that piper's music is probably more beautiful than anything we could imagine. It's the music of the gods. And those young lovers will never grow old or tire of one another. And that baby calf will not have to die. They are forever preserved on the urn. My mother died in 1993 when she was just 52 years old. That is younger than I am now. And I wish she were here now. She should have lived longer. But she lives on this cassette tape, perpetually 32 years old, the mother of 3 small children and a new baby infant. She's married to my dad, and they haven't gone down that rugged road, fallen out of love, and gotten divorced. She's enamored with her Scotty dog, and she dreams of someday owning one of those 1973 brand new VW buses that hold 7. But as she says on the cassette, they want $3,500 for the doggone things new. She and these images live in perpetually frozen time. And when I can't stand it that she's not here, she is there. And so it is with stories, the people that we celebrate, whether it's that parade of cowboys that Andy brought us throughout the weekend and all the music and poetry that they created, or Alton with Richard Fisk and Sensei Abe? Zenze Abe, and the friendship that they had. Or Jessica and her dad. We got to meet him. We got to make sauce with him. And Mitchell, the little boy Jonathan on Snow Hill, is based loosely on a time in his own life when he was so sick he spent a holiday in the hospital. And then this morning, we got to meet your stepchildren. We got to meet your son and your mother. You brought them to life for us. The people that we remember and celebrate in our stories, they live forever as long as we continue to tell their stories. Thank you all so, so much.
Wow. I'm sure, like me, many times this weekend, you've heard a story and it sparked a memory. I remember when I sold my 8 years old, I was 8 years old, and I sold my younger sister for $2 to my neighbor. When one of the other tellers was talking about how her mother wouldn't let her do it. Just so many things come to mind. Andy's story about his mother made me think of things with my own mom, and there's just been so much fodder for our own stories, as well as great enjoyment of the presentations of the stories that we've heard today. I'd like us to just all give one more big hand to all our tellers this weekend. And now, at this time, we will let you go out into the world and share your stories. But if you would fold your black chairs and help us with that, we would much appreciate it. Thank you.